The morning Rhiannon Rivers learned she would die began with the scent of wild roses drifting through her bedroom window. She woke to birdsong, to pale dawn light casting everything in shades of gray and amber, and for one perfect moment she allowed herself to believe this day would be ordinary. That she would rise and tend the healing garden behind the cottage, perhaps walk to the village market if her stepmother Meredith permitted it. That the 24 years of her life would continue in their quiet, unremarkable pattern. The illusion lasted only until she heard the footsteps on the stairs, her father's footsteps. That careful, deliberate tread that meant Garrett Rivers had been sent to deliver news he lacked the spine to refuse. The sound of a man who had long ago surrendered his courage to a woman with sharper edges and a harder heart. The door opened without a knock. It never did anymore, not since Meredith had decided that privacy was a luxury Omegas didn't deserve. Garrett stood in the threshold, shoulders hunched, as though the weight of his own cowardice physically burdened him. Behind him, Meredith's sharp features appeared in the gap satisfaction, poorly disguised as maternal concern. "The Alpha has called for you," Garrett said. His voice barely rose above a whisper. He would not meet her eyes. Rhiannon sat up slowly in the narrow bed, her heart beginning its treacherous acceleration, even as her mind struggled to comprehend what those words meant. Alpha Thorn Drake never called for her. She was Omega, the lowest rung in the pack hierarchy, useful only for menial tasks, and her knowledge of healing herbs passed down from a grandmother long dead. Important wolves did not concern themselves with the movements of someone so insignificant. "Wife Wayne," the question emerged steadier than she felt. Meredith stepped forward, crowding into the cramped space that served as Rhiannon's sleeping quarters. The room smelled of lavender and malice, her stepmother's signature scent. "Do not question the Alpha's wisdom. You are needed for the good of the pack. That should be honor sufficient." The good of the pack. Those words carried weight in their community, an obligation that superseded individual desire or survival. Rhiannon's stomach twisted with premonition. She had heard whispers in recent weeks, fragments of conversation that ceased abruptly when she drew near. Attacks along the border of the Shadowpine Wilderness. Something massive and savage that moved through the trees with unnatural stealth, leaving carnage in its wake. 3 warriors dead in the last month alone. Their bodies had been found so mangled that the pack had barely recognized them, torn apart by claws that left gouges in the earth itself. The monster. They called it the Cursed Wolf, though none who encountered it lived to confirm whether it was truly Shifter or some other abomination. Stories varied, each more terrifying than the last. Some claimed it was twice the size of any natural wolf with eyes that burned golden fire. Others swore it was a demon given flesh punishment for ancient sins the pack had long forgotten. And now Alpha Thorn called for her. "No." The word escaped before thought could temper it. Her father flinched as though struck. Meredith's expression sharpened with something darker than anger, something that looked almost like triumph. "You will obey," Meredith said, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "The Alpha has chosen you for sacrifice to appease the beast. Your death may purchase safety for the rest of us." Sacrifice. The word hung in the air between them, stealing oxygen from the small room. Rhiannon's lungs constricted as understanding crashed over her in waves of cold realization. They would bind her and leave her in the forest, an offering to whatever horror dwelled in those cursed trees. She would die alone in terror and agony so that others might sleep peacefully in their beds. "I am your daughter." She looked at Garrett, searching desperately for some flicker of paternal protection, some indication that he valued her life above his own fear. Garrett turned away. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, made him look older than his 52 years. "You are needed, the Alpha has spoken." "You are not his daughter," Meredith corrected with cruel precision. Her eyes glittered in the dim light. "You are his burden, born of a first wife who gave him nothing of value before she died. This is your purpose, the only contribution you will ever make to this pack. Be grateful you can serve something greater than your worthless existence." The venom should have been familiar after years of enduring Meredith's resentment. The woman had married Garrett when Rhiannon was 6, arriving with her own daughter and a determination to erase any trace of the first wife who had dared to be loved. But delivered alongside a death sentence, the words carved deeper than usual, settling into Rhiannon's bones like ice. She thought of Briar, her 16-year-old half-sister, who sometimes offered small kindnesses when their mother was not watching. A shared glance of sympathy. An extra helping of bread slipped onto Rhiannon's plate when the household stores ran low. Would Briar weep for her, or would relief that she had not been chosen override any grief when Rhiannon's voice had gone hollow? "Now the ceremony begins within the hour. The entire pack gathers to witness your bravery." Meredith's smile contained no warmth, only the satisfaction of a woman who had finally found a way to be rid of an inconvenient reminder of her husband's past love. They left her then father and stepmother, closing the door behind them with a finality that echoed through the small room. Rhiannon remained sitting on the narrow bed, her hands trembling in her lap, despite her efforts to still them. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee through the window and disappear into the countryside, to never return to this place that had never truly been home. But where would she go? Omega wolves did not survive alone. Without a pack, she would starve or be killed by rogues who would sense her vulnerability from miles away, drawn to it like sharks to blood and water. The bonds that tied wolves to their packs were not merely social, but biological, woven into the very fabric of what they were. She had no choice. She had never had a choice. Moving with mechanical precision, Rhiannon washed her face in the basin of cold water on the washstand. The water was so cold it made her fingers ache, shocking her skin into numbness. She braided her long chestnut hair with steady hands, weaving it tightly to keep it from her face. The routine of it was soothing, familiar. Something to focus on that was not the approaching certainty of her own death. The dress she chose was simple, undyed wool that had belonged to her mother. Rhiannon had kept it all these years, despite Meredith's occasional suggestions that she throw it away, that holding on to the past served no purpose. Wearing it now felt like armor against what was to come, a reminder that she descended from a woman who had been strong and kind before illness claimed her. If she must die, she would die as her mother's daughter. The walk to the village center passed in a blur of faces and familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign, as though she were seeing them for the last time, and they had transformed in the seeing. Faces she had known her entire life watched from doorways and windows. Some showed pity, fleeting and useless. Most showed relief that fate had chosen another, that their own children would be safe for another day, another month, another year. Children who had once played with her in these very streets now pressed against their mother's skirts, staring with wide eyes at the Omega who would become their salvation. She wondered if they would remember her name after she was gone, or if she would fade into legend, reduced to a cautionary tale parents told to frighten their young into obedience. The gathering place was an open square of packed earth encircled by stone markers, worn smooth by centuries of weather and the passage of countless feet. The stones were old, older than the village itself, remnants of something that had stood here before living memory. Already, it seemed, the entire pack had assembled more than 200 wolves in human form, creating a wall of bodies and judgment. At the center stood Alpha Thorn Drake. His presence commanded attention without effort, drawing every eye even in a crowd of hundreds. He was perhaps 47, winters his hair more gray than brown now, but his physique remained imposing. Muscles defined beneath the fine cloth of his tunic spoke of a man who had not grown soft in his position, who still trained daily with the warriors he commanded. The mark of Alpha showed in the way others unconsciously created space around him, in the careful neutrality of their expressions when his gaze swept over them. Beside Thorn stood his beta, a broad-shouldered man named Owen Steele, whose loyalty to the Alpha was legendary. Warriors flanked them, both young and strong, the pack's defenders, who had failed to stop the monster that was killing their brothers. Their failure hung in the air like smoke, visible in the tension of their shoulders and the way they would not meet one another's eyes. "Rhiannon," Thorn's voice carried across the square, silencing the low murmur of conversation. "Approach." Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her forward through the parted crowd. She felt their stares like physical touches, assessing her worth, measuring whether her death would be adequate payment for their continued survival. The morning sun beat down on the square, unusually warm for early spring, and she could feel sweat beginning to gather at the small of her back beneath the wool dress. When she reached the Alpha, she lowered her eyes in automatic submission, the behavior trained into every Omega from childhood. To meet an Alpha's gaze directly was to challenge, and challenges from Omegas were not tolerated. "Look at me," Thorn commanded. It was not a request. Rhiannon raised her gaze, slowly meeting those calculating, gray eyes that had governed her life since birth. Eyes that held no warmth, no recognition of her as anything more than a tool to be used and discarded. Thorn studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and she wondered what he saw. A scared girl, a convenient solution, something less than human. "You understand why you have been chosen?" "Yes, Alpha." What else could she say? That she did not wish to die. That terror clawed at her throat until breathing required conscious effort. Such truths were irrelevant to men who had already decided her fate. Thorn turned to address the assembled pack, pitching his voice to carry to every listener. He was good at this, she realized. The performance. the careful construction of narrative that would allow them all to sleep at night. The beast has taken from us, he continued. Warriors, providers, fathers, and sons. It grows bolder with each passing moon encroaching further into our territory. We have tried force. We have set traps. We have sent our strongest warriors. Nothing deters it. The elders have counseled that perhaps what is required is not violence but offering. Blood has been spilled. Let us see if blood offered freely will appease the creature's rage. Blood offered freely, as though she had chosen this. As though standing here awaiting her execution was an act of voluntary sacrifice rather than obedience, enforced by absolute hierarchy and the implicit threat of what would happen to those who refused. But Rhiannon understood the performance. Thorn needed the pack to believe this was noble, that her death meant something beyond expedience and fear. You serve your pack with this final act, Thorn said, and perhaps he even believed it. Your name will be remembered, an empty promise. Within a generation, she would be forgotten, reduced to a footnote in pack history if she was mentioned at all. But she inclined her head, accepting the lie, because resistance would change nothing and might only make these final moments more painful. Owen Steele stepped forward, heavy rope coiled in his hands. The binding was ritualistic, meant to prevent her from fleeing once left alone in the forest. They wrapped the rope around her wrists with practiced efficiency, pulling it tight enough that the rough fibers bit into her skin. The pain was sharp and immediate, grounding her in the moment. Then they secured her ankles with enough slack to walk, but not to run, transforming her from person to prisoner with a few lengths of hemp. Rhiannon wondered distantly if she would bear rope burns when the wolf finally tore her apart, or if death would come too quickly for such minor injuries to matter. The procession to the forest edge moved with ceremonial slowness. Thorn led with Owen and two other warriors escorting Rhiannon. The pack followed at a distance, a silent mass bearing witness to her fate. She caught glimpses of Briar among them, her young face streaked with tears she tried futilely to hide. Their eyes met briefly, and Rhiannon managed a small smile, forgiving her sister for the cowardice of silence. What could Briar have done? Challenged the Alpha and been exiled or killed for such insolence? The Shadowpine wilderness loomed ahead, ancient trees creating a wall of shadow even in daylight. Local legend claimed the woods were cursed, that those who entered too deeply never returned, their souls trapped forever wandering beneath the canopy. Whether such stories held truth or were merely superstition, the forest had been forbidden for as long as anyone remembered. None ventured past the first line of trees, none except the condemned. At the boundary, Thorn raised his hand, halting the procession. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, laden with a presence that raised the fine hairs along Rhiannon's arms. It was as though the forest itself was watching, waiting, breathing in the space between heartbeats. Beyond this point, you walk alone, Thorn announced, his voice carrying the weight of pronouncement. May your sacrifice grant us peace. May the beast be satisfied and retreat to the depths from which it came. They untied the rope around her ankles, then granting her the ability to walk into her own death. Her wrists remained bound, rendering her helpless against whatever awaited in those shadows. Rhiannon looked back one final time at the pack, at the faces of people she had known since childhood, who now watched her with varying degrees of pity and relief. Her father stared at the ground, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. Meredith wore satisfaction barely concealed behind a mask of solemn duty. Briar sobbed openly, now restrained by their mother's firm grip on her arm. No one spoke in her defense. No one stepped forward to say this was wrong, that offering one of their own to a monster made them no better than the beast they feared. Rhiannon turned away from them, from the pack that had never truly been hers, and walked into the Shadowpine wilderness. The temperature dropped immediately, as though the trees held captive some ancient cold that daylight could not reach. Her footsteps made no sound on the carpet of fallen leaves, centuries of decay creating a path that seemed to absorb noise itself. Behind her, she heard the shuffle of the pack retreating, returning to their safe homes and ordinary lives, already forgetting the Omega who had purchased their security with her blood. She walked because standing still felt like hastening the inevitable. Her bound hands made balance precarious, forcing her to move carefully to avoid tripping over roots that snaked across the forest floor like petrified serpents. The rope chafed with every movement, and she could feel moisture beginning to gather where it rubbed her skin raw. How far should she go? How deep into this cursed place before the wolf found her? The questions seemed absurd, but her mind clung to them, grateful for any distraction from the terror building in her chest like a physical weight. Time lost meaning beneath the canopy. Minutes could have been hours. The forest remained unnaturally silent, not even birds daring to sing here. Just her breathing, too loud and too fast, and the whisper of wind through branches high above where the sunlight could not reach. Then she smelled it. musk and pine wild and potent, the scent of a predator that had never known the confines of civilization. Every instinct inherited from her wolf bloodline screamed danger, though her human form could not respond with the speed or strength that might save her. Her pulse thundered in her ears so violent she thought her ribs might crack from the force. The undergrowth to her left rustled with purposeful movement. Something massive moved through the shadows circling her with deliberate patience. She caught glimpses of silver-black fur of a body far too large to be a natural wolf. The stories had not exaggerated. This creature was enormous, easily twice the size of any shifter in wolf form she had ever seen. Muscle rippled beneath its pelt with each movement, speaking of power that could tear her apart without effort. It emerged from the trees directly in front of her, and Rhiannon's breath stopped. The wolf was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Its coat was the color of storm clouds, silver gray darkened to near black along the spine, and it moved with fluid grace despite its massive size. But it was the eyes that held her frozen, unable to flee or fight. Amber brilliance burning with intelligence far beyond any animal fixed on her with an intensity that stripped away every defense she might have raised. This was no mindless beast. Whatever this creature was, or had been, awareness lived behind that predatory gaze. Consciousness. Understanding. Rhiannon closed her eyes, unable to watch her own death approach. She heard it move closer, felt the displacement of air as the massive head lowered toward her. Hot breath ghosted across her face and throat, scenting her as she had scented it. Any moment now, teeth would close around her neck. It would be quick. Please let it be quick. The wolf sniffed along her jaw, down to where her pulse beat frantically at the base of her throat. She waited for the killing bite, every muscle locked in anticipation of pain. It did not come. Instead, a low rumble emanated from the creature's chest. Not quite a growl, something deeper and more complex, a sound that vibrated through her body and raised goosebumps along her arms despite the lack of any true cold. Then impossibly the wolf stepped back. Rhiannon's eyes flew open in shock. The massive creature was retreating, moving backward, with its gaze still locked on her face. Those wolf gold eyes held something she could not name, some emotion that seemed out of place in a beast meant only for killing. Confusion. Recognition. Before she could process what was happening, the wolf turned and vanished into the forest, leaving her standing alone, alive and completely bewildered. Rhiannon stood frozen long after the wolf vanished, her mind struggling to process what had not happened. She was alive. The realization arrived slowly, like blood returning to a limb that had fallen asleep, bringing with it pins and needles of confused relief. Her bound hands trembled, and she looked down at them as though they belonged to someone else, expecting to see claw marks or blood. There was nothing, not even a scratch. Why had it spared her? The question circled through her thoughts, finding no purchase. Monsters did not show mercy. Beasts did not retreat from easy prey. Yet the wolf had done exactly that, had looked at her with those impossible eyes like molten bronze and chosen to walk away. The memory of its regard sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold seeping up from the forest floor. The shadow pine wilderness remained unnaturally silent around her, as though holding its breath. Rhiannon became acutely aware that standing still made her vulnerable. Just because the wolf had not killed her immediately did not mean it would not return. Perhaps it was playing with her some cruel instinct to let fear ripen before the final strike. The thought mobilized her, forced her legs to move despite their trembling. She needed to find shelter. Somewhere defensible where she could rest and think without exposure on all sides. The bound hands complicated everything, making even simple movement an exercise in frustrated awkwardness. She tried working at the knots with her teeth, but whoever had tied them knew their craft well. The rope held firm, cutting deeper into her wrists with each futile attempt, leaving burns that would scar if she lived long enough to heal. Moving deeper into the forest felt counterintuitive, but returning to the edge where the pack had abandoned her seemed even more foolish. They would not welcome her back. If anything, her survival would be seen as failure evidence that she had not fulfilled her purpose. Better to press forward and hope for some cave or thick copse of trees that could provide minimal protection against the elements and whatever else prowled these woods. The terrain grew rougher as she walked, the ground sloping upward in a gradual incline that suggested she was approaching higher elevation. Ancient trees towered overhead, their canopies so dense that daylight barely penetrated. Moss covered everything here, transforming fallen logs into soft green mounds and muffling her footsteps until she moved through near total silence. It should have been peaceful, this quiet green world, untouched by human hands for generations. Instead, the quiet felt oppressive, a presence in itself that watched and waited. How long she walked, Rhiannon could not guess. Time behaved strangely in this place, stretching and contracting without pattern. But eventually the trees thinned ahead, revealing a clearing that should not exist. She approached cautiously, senses alert for any sign of danger, though what she could do against threat with her hands bound was unclear. What emerged from the undergrowth stole her breath. Ruins sprawled across the clearing, stone structures that had once been grand, now reclaimed by nature with patient inevitability. Ivy climbed crumbling walls and trees grew through what had been windows or doorways, their roots breaking apart foundation stones with the slow violence of decades. But even in decay, the architecture spoke of wealth and power. These had not been common buildings. The dressed stone, the careful joints, the sheer scale suggested something important had stood here. A palace, perhaps, or a keep. Rhiannon moved closer, drawn by curiosity stronger than caution. Her bound hands made climbing over fallen masonry difficult, but she managed, driven by a need to understand what this place had been. The central structure was largest, its walls still partially intact despite what must have been centuries of abandonment. She could see where a great hall had stood, could trace the outline of rooms branching off from it. Whoever had lived here had commanded respect and resources. It was on one of these partially standing walls that she found the first symbol. At first it appeared to be merely decorative carving, the kind of ornamentation wealthy families commissioned to display their status. But as Rhiannon studied it more closely, she recognized intent beyond aesthetics. The symbol consisted of interlocking circles carved deep into the stone with a precision that suggested ritual rather than art. Within the circles, smaller symbols nested, some she recognized from the healing texts her grandmother had shown her, others completely foreign. Lunar symbols, protection runes, and something else. Something that made her skin prickle with unease, despite not understanding its meaning. She moved along the wall, finding more carvings. They told a story, though she lacked the knowledge to fully read it. A figure that could be wolf or man surrounded by chains. A woman reaching toward the bound figure. Above them both, 3 moon phases, rendered in careful detail. And beneath it all, words carved in a language that was almost familiar, but frustratingly just beyond comprehension. Rhiannon traced the carvings with bound fingers, trying to decipher their meaning. The stone felt warm beneath her touch, warmer than it should have been given the lack of direct sunlight filtering through the trees. Magic. The word appeared in her mind unbidden. These were not mere decorations, but active working spells or wards set by someone with considerable power. A doorway gaped in the wall ahead, leading into what had been an interior room. The roof had long since collapsed, but enough walls remained to create a sheltered space. Rhiannon ducked inside, her eyes adjusting to the deeper shadows. And there, carved into what had once been an altar stone, she found the message. Unlike the other symbols, this one was written in common script, though the language felt archaic, formal in a way modern speech had abandoned. The words had been cut deep, meant to endure, and they had. Moss and lichen partially obscured the text, but Rhiannon brushed it away with careful fingers, revealing the inscription beneath. Forged by treachery, bound by force, the cure dwells within the curse itself. What was stolen shall be returned when the moon recognizes her match. The words resonated with something deep in her chest, a recognition she could not explain. Rhiannon read them again, parsing each phrase for meaning. Someone had been betrayed. Someone had been bound through force. And there was a cure, though what illness or curse it addressed remained unclear. The final line proved most cryptic. When the moon recognizes her match. More symbols surrounded the text, and these Rhiannon understood better from her healing studies. She identified the glyph for wolf, first rendered in stylized form, that still captured the essence of the animal. Beside it, a woman's silhouette, arms raised as though invoking or offering something. Between them, a third symbol she had seen before in her grandmother's oldest books, always accompanied by warnings and cautious whispers. The mate bond, her breath caught. This was about mating, about the sacred connection that could form between wolves. But the configuration was wrong. Mate bonds were natural, spontaneous, requiring no ritual or magic. They simply existed, or they did not, a gift from the moon goddess herself. Yet this altar spoke of deliberate creation, or perhaps restoration of such a bond. "What is this place?" she whispered to the empty ruins. The wolf appeared so silently that Rhiannon did not realize she was no longer alone until she felt the displacement of air behind her. She spun, heart leaping into her throat, expecting attack. But the massive creature simply sat at the edge of the chamber, watching her with that unsettling amber gaze. In the dimmer light, its coat appeared darker, the silver gray shading to pewter and shadow. This close, she could see details she had missed before. Scars marked its body, old wounds that had healed into white lines through the dense fur. These were not random injuries, but the methodical cuts of weapons, evidence of battles fought and survived. Around its throat, the fur grew in an unusual pattern, as though something had once rested there, some collar or binding that had left its mark even after removal. The wolf did not move toward her. It simply watched, head tilted slightly in what might have been curiosity, waiting for what Rhiannon could not guess. "You did not kill me before," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why, wow," and no response. Of course not. It was an animal, however intelligent it might seem. Animals did not speak, did not understand human words. Yet something in the way the wolf's ears swiveled toward her and the focus of its attention suggested comprehension beyond instinct. Rhiannon turned back to the altar, though she kept the wolf in her peripheral vision. These markings speak of betrayal and binding, of curses and cures. She traced the wolf glyph with her bound fingers. Someone was forced into this form, trapped here. "Is that you? Are you the cursed one?" The wolf rose to its feet, and Rhiannon's muscles tensed for flight, despite knowing she could never outrun it. But instead of approaching, the creature moved to the opposite wall, nosing at a section of stone that appeared identical to the rest. It pawed once, twice, then looked back at her with clear intent. "You want me to look there?" The wolf's tail swished once, a gesture that felt distinctly affirmative. Rhiannon approached cautiously, unsure what she would find. The stone the wolf had indicated looked solid, unremarkable. But when she pressed her bound hands against it, she felt the subtle give of a loose piece. With effort, she managed to work it free, revealing a hollow space beyond. Inside, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth that had preserved it through the years, lay a book. Rhiannon withdrew it with shaking hands, the weight substantial, the binding clearly expensive, even after so much time. She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a leather cover tooled with more of the same symbols she had seen throughout the ruins. When she opened it, the pages proved to be vellum, each one covered in neat script that showed the careful hand of someone accustomed to formal writing. A journal, or perhaps more accurately, a confession. The first page bore a date that made Rhiannon's breath catch, 20 years ago, near to the month, and beneath it a name she did not recognize, but which carried weight nonetheless. "Seraphina," she began to read, and with each line the world she thought she understood crumbled further. "They came for me at midnight, warriors bearing the mark of the Drake house, but acting under orders I knew to be false. My coven tried to protect me, but we are healers and seers, not fighters. They cut down Lila and Brea before my eyes, their blood staining the sacred circle we had tended for generations. The beta stood over their bodies and told me I had a choice: curse the Alpha King or watch every member of my coven die in the same manner." Rhiannon's hand shook harder as she read. The words blurred momentarily before her vision cleared, driven by a need to understand what had happened in this place 2 decades ago. "I am not brave enough to let them all die for principle. I agreed to his terms to forge a curse that would strip Dominic Ashwood of his humanity, trap him in wolf form, and drive his mind toward beast consciousness until nothing of the man remained. But I am not without resistance. Into the curse itself I wove its antidote. The mate bond, if true and freely given, can break what I was forced to create. I leave these words, these symbols, these clues, praying someone will find them. Praying the Alpha King's true mate will come, will recognize him, will choose him despite the monster he has become." The journal continued, detailing the curse in technical terms Rhiannon only partially understood, explaining the mechanism by which mate bonds could unravel magical compulsion. This Seraphina had been thorough, leaving instructions alongside her account, ensuring that whoever found this information would know how to proceed. Rhiannon looked up from the pages to find the wolf watching her with an intensity that stole breath. Understanding crashed over her with the force of physical impact. This was not just any cursed creature. This was the Alpha King, the ruler who had supposedly abandoned his throne 20 years ago. Thorn Drake had told stories of Dominic Ashwood's cruelty, of his tyrannical rule that necessitated rebellion. But if this journal spoke truth, if Seraphina's confession was genuine, then everything Rhiannon had been taught was lies built upon betrayal. "Dominic." The name emerged as barely a whisper. The wolf's ears pricked forward, its entire body going still in a way that confirmed what she already knew. This was the Alpha King, reduced to beast form by magic wielded under threat of genocide. And Thorn Drake, the Alpha who currently ruled, was the Beta who had orchestrated it all. The magnitude of the deception left Rhiannon reeling. How many years had Thorn maintained this charade? How many wolves believed the lies about their true king? And more pressing, more dangerous, what would Thorn do if he learned the truth might be discovered? Dominic moved closer, and this time Rhiannon did not flinch away. He lowered his massive head, bringing his muzzle near her bound wrists. For a heartbeat, she thought he meant to bite, to free her through violence. Instead, he caught the rope between careful teeth and began to work at the knots with surprising dexterity. It took several minutes of patient effort, but eventually the rope loosened and fell away. Rhiannon rubbed her abraded wrist, relief flooding through her as circulation fully returned. The rope burns stung angry red marks against her pale skin, but the pain was distant compared to the weight of what she had just learned. She met Dominic's eyes like molten bronze, seeing them now with new understanding. Can you transform? Can you become human again, even briefly? The way he dropped his gaze, the defeated slump of his shoulders provided answer enough. Whatever magic bound him, it was not easily overcome. The curse held tight, and without the mate bond Serafina described, he would remain trapped. But the journal had mentioned the mate bond as cure, which meant Dominic's true mate existed somewhere waiting to be found. Rhiannon's stomach twisted with complicated emotions she did not want to examine. Disappointment. No, that made no sense. She barely knew this creature, this king. Yet something in her recoiled from the thought of him finding another, of watching him transform back to human through someone else's love. Ridiculous. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on practical matters. We need to understand more, she said, gesturing to the journal. Serafina left detailed instructions. If we can find her, she might be able to help to explain what needs to happen. Dominic made a soft noise somewhere between whine and growl, his attention fixed on Rhiannon with unsettling focus. Then slowly, deliberately, he moved closer until his muzzle rested against her collarbone. She felt him inhale deeply, scenting her as he had when they first met. The reaction was immediate and undeniable. His entire body went rigid, a shudder running through him from ears to tail. When he pulled back, his eyes had gone wide, pupils dilated with something that looked like shock or recognition, or perhaps desperate hope. And Rhiannon felt it too, though she had no name for the sensation. A pull, magnetic and insistent, centering in her chest and spreading outward. Heat that had nothing to do with temperature. A rightness that defied logic. Oh no. She was the mate bond he needed. She was the cure Serafina had woven into the curse. Days passed in the ruins, measured by the shifting of light through broken walls and the rhythm of needs that demanded attention, regardless of circumstance. Rhiannon found a spring-fed pool in what had once been a courtyard, the water cold and clear. She found storage rooms where fabric had been preserved by some lingering magic enough to fashion a cloak against the evening chill. She found her grandmother's knowledge of edible plants serving her well, supplementing the fresh kills Dominic brought back from his hunts. And she began to understand the rhythm of Dominic's cursed existence. He remained wolf during daylight, the beast form, holding him captive with iron certainty. But as evening approached, she noticed changes. Small at first, barely perceptible shifts in his behavior and bearing. The way he would position himself near the altar as shadows lengthened. The tension that would gather in his muscles like a storm about to break. It was on the fifth evening that the first transformation came. Dominic had been lying near the altar, where Rhiannon sat reading more of Serafina's journal, his eyes tracking her movements with that unsettling intelligence. Then his body went rigid, every muscle locking as though seized by invisible hands. The sound that tore from his throat was neither wholly animal nor human, but something caught agonizingly between. Dominic Rhiannon dropped the journal, rushing to his side despite not knowing how to help. The transformation seized him with vicious efficiency. Bone ground against bone, the wet crack of breaking joints audible, even over his strangled cries. The shifts she had witnessed among her pack flowed with natural grace, bodies moving between forms with practiced ease. This was violence, incarnate magic, forcing flesh to obey, despite resistance. It lasted 3 minutes that felt eternal. Rhiannon knelt beside him, one hand hovering over his writhing form, wanting to offer comfort, but afraid of causing more pain. When finally the spasm ceased, a man lay where the wolf had been. Even in obvious pain, even with his body trembling from the ordeal, Dominic Ashwood was arresting. His face held sharp angles, softened by full lips currently pressed thin with discomfort. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, tangled and unkempt from 20 years without proper care. His body bore the marks of 2 decades lived as a hunted thing, lean muscle carved from necessity rather than vanity. Scars crossing his torso and arms in patterns that told stories of survival she could only imagine. He opened his eyes and they remained that impossible burnished gold. The curse had not released him fully, only granted temporary reprieve. Alpha King. Dominic rasped, his voice raw from disuse. He tried to push himself upright, failed, tried again with stubborn determination that spoke to the man he had been before magic stole his throne and his humanity. Rhiannon moved to help him, offering her shoulder for support. He hesitated before accepting, and she felt the exact moment their skin made contact. Heat bloomed where they touched the mate bond, recognizing and celebrating the connection. Dominic's sharp intake of breath told her he felt it too. "How long do you have?" she asked. "Minutes." He looked down at his human hands as though they belonged to a stranger, flexing fingers that had been paused for so long. "Never more than 10. The curse pulls me back." 10 minutes, barely time to speak a handful of sentences before the agony of transformation would claim him again. Rhiannon's chest tightened with frustrated sympathy. 20 years of this torture of glimpsing his humanity only to have it ripped away again and again. Seraphina's journal says the mate bond can break the curse entirely. We need to complete it. Dominic's laugh held no humor. You do not know what you offer, Omega. The mate bond is sacred permanent. You would tie yourself to a beast for all your remaining years based on words in an ancient book. You are not just a beast. The conviction in her voice surprised them both. You are the rightful Alpha King. And if the bond can free you, then yes, I offer it willingly. He stared at her, those wolf gold eyes searching her face for signs of deception or fear. She met his gaze steadily, letting him see her resolve the determination that had carried her into the Shadowpine wilderness and kept her alive when she should have died. Why? The word emerged barely above a whisper. You owe me nothing. Your pack sacrificed you, but you escaped. You could leave, find another territory, start again. Instead, you stay with an accursed creature and offer yourself to restore a king you never knew. Rhiannon considered how to answer. The truth was complicated, layered with emotions she barely understood herself. Part of it was justice, the need to see Thorn exposed for his crimes. Part was the pull of the mate bond itself, that undeniable recognition of rightness. But beneath all of it lay something simpler. Because you did not kill me when you could have. Because you protected me in that first moment when any true beast would have torn me apart. You are still in there, Dominic. Still human despite 20 years trapped in wolf form. That deserves a chance at freedom. Magic and flesh warred within him as the transformation pulled him back, the curse refusing to release its hold. His skeleton seemed to collapse inward before reforming, each bone finding its new shape through agony. Rhiannon held him through it, ignoring his attempts to push her away, refusing to let him endure the torment alone. When finally the wolf emerged again, she remained close, one hand resting on his shoulder until the shaking subsided. Over the following days, the pattern repeated. Each evening brought transformation, each time lasting slightly longer. 5 minutes became 7, then 10 stretched to 12, then 15. Dominic's body was remembering humanity, the mate bond slowly undermining the curse's hold with every moment they spent together. During his human moments, they talked. He spoke in fragmented sentences about his reign before the betrayal, about the kingdom he had tried to build, where strength served justice rather than cruelty. About Thorn Drake, his beta and friend, who had smiled while poisoning wine with liquid silver. About waking trapped in wolf form, watching through beast eyes as Thorn spread lies to the pack, painting tyranny where there had been reform, claiming necessary action where there had been calculated murder. He told them I had become tyrannical, Dominic said one evening, his voice stronger now that the transformations happened more frequently, that I planned to enslave weaker wolves to hoard resources while others starved. All lies built on carefully constructed evidence. By the time Seraphina cursed me, the pack believed I deserved punishment. And your intended mate, Rhiannon tried to keep her tone neutral, though jealousy she had no right to feel colored the question. Dominic's expression shuddered. There was no intended mate. Thorn wanted that title for himself, wanted the power that came with it. When I showed no interest in the alliances, he suggested when I refused to mate for political advantage, he saw opportunity. They were sitting in what had once been a solar stone benches still intact despite the missing roof. Moonlight illuminated the space, casting shadows that danced across Dominic's scarred shoulders. He wore clothes now, simple garments Rhiannon had fashioned from cloth she found in a storage room remarkably preserved by some lingering magic. The mate bond is manifesting physically, he said, gesturing to the back of her neck. Can you feel it? Rhiannon touched the spot, feeling the raised skin there. Not painful, but warm, as though a brand rested against her flesh. What does it look like? A crescent moon with your wolf form inside. The mark of a true mate bond. His fingers ghosted near the mark, but did not make contact, as though afraid that touching might break some spell. When the bond completes fully, my mark will appear on you as well. Two halves of a whole. How do we complete it? The question emerged more breathless than she intended. Dominic met her eyes, and the heat there made her acutely aware of his proximity, of the bare skin visible where his shirt hung open. The bond requires acknowledgement and acceptance from both parties. A conscious choice, freely made with full understanding of what it means. He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek. But words are not sufficient. The bond completes through physical connection, through claiming. Understanding crashed over her, bringing heat to her face. She had heard whispers among mated pairs in her pack, had understood in abstract terms what the bond required. But facing it with Dominic, with this man who was equal parts stranger and familiar, made theory suddenly visceral. "I am not afraid," she said, surprised to find it true. "You should be." But his hand came up to cup her face thumb, tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I have been beast longer than man Rhiannon. The wolf is never far from the surface. I could hurt you without meaning to. You have had countless opportunities to hurt me. You chose protection instead. 3 minutes, an eternity measured in shattered breaths and convulsing muscle. The change tore through him like wildfire through dry timber, stealing away the moment. Rhiannon held him through the agony, whispering reassurances as bones broke and reformed. When the wolf emerged, he pressed his head against her shoulder in what felt unmistakably like apology. 2 more days passed before the next attempt. Dominic's human time had stretched to nearly 25 minutes, enough for proper conversation. They were discussing Seraphina's journal, trying to decipher the more technical passages about curse breaking, when he went very still. "What is it?" Rhiannon asked. "Your scent changed." His voice had dropped lower, rougher. "The bond grows stronger. It calls to both wolf and man." Heat pooled in her belly at the way he looked at her, predatory and possessive and wanting. She should retreat, should maintain distance until they understood the bond better. Instead, she moved closer. "Then perhaps we should answer." Dominic's control visibly frayed. His breathing quickened, pupils dilating until only a ring of gold remained. "Rhiannon, if we do this, there is no undoing it. You will be mine and I will be yours for all our days. Are you certain?" She answered by closing the remaining distance between them, pressing her lips to his, in a kiss that started gentle and quickly turned desperate. Dominic made a sound deep in his chest, half growl and entirely human, his arms coming around her to pull her against him. The mate bond blazed to life, no longer merely warm but burning. Rhiannon felt it in her blood, in her bones, felt the exact moment it recognized completion approaching. Dominic's hands moved to her waist, then lower his touch, reverent despite the urgency thrumming between them. "Mine," he breathed against her mouth. "Yours," she agreed. The transformation took him at the worst possible moment, his body convulsing away from hers as the curse reasserted control. Rhiannon watched helplessly as he writhed, his agonized sounds tearing at her heart. When the wolf finally emerged, he looked at her with what she could swear was frustrated rage. "We will complete this," she promised, him running her hands through his fur. "The curse is weakening. I can feel it. Soon you will have ours in human form, and then the bond can finish what we started." But even as she spoke, the reassurance unease prickled at the base of her skull. They had been in the ruins for nearly 2 weeks now. How long before Thorn sent someone to confirm her death? How long before they were discovered here, vulnerable and trapped by the curse's timing? As though summoned by her thoughts, Dominic's ears suddenly pricked forward, his entire body going tense with alertness. He moved to the entrance of their shelter, nose testing the air, a low growl building in his chest. Someone was coming. The scent carried on the wind brought Dominic's hackles rising. Rhiannon recognized his defensive posture immediately and moved deeper into the ruined chamber, pressing her back against stone still warm from afternoon sun. 16 days had passed since anyone from the pack would have reason to venture this direction, yet someone approached with clear purpose. Dominic positioned himself between Rhiannon and the entrance, his massive form blocking any direct path to her. The growl building in his chest was warning and promised both. She rested one hand on his shoulder, while feeling the tension coiled in every muscle. "How many?" she whispered. His ears swiveled, tracking sounds too faint for her human hearing. 2, perhaps 3 individuals moving through the forest without attempting stealth. They wanted to be heard, wanted whatever dwelled in these ruins to know they approached. Hunters confident in their superiority over prey. The first figure emerged from the tree line and Rhiannon's stomach dropped. She recognized Owen Steelthorne's beta, his broad shoulders and battle-scarred face unmistakable even at distance. Behind him came 2 younger warriors, both carrying silver-tipped spears that glinted in the fading light. They had come prepared to kill. Owen stopped at the edge of the clearing, his gaze sweeping across the ruins before settling on the chamber where Dominic stood guard. His eyes widened fractionally when he spotted Rhiannon alive and clearly unharmed. "The Omega survives!" Owen called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years commanding others. "Alpha Thorn will be relieved. We feared the beast had taken you." Rhiannon stepped forward before Dominic could stop her, though his warning growl told her exactly what he thought of that decision. She kept one hand on his back, fingers buried in thick fur, maintaining connection while facing the warriors. "I am well as you can see. You may return to the Alpha and tell him his sacrifice was unnecessary." Owen's expression hardened. You will return with us. The pack has mourned your loss. Your family wishes to see you restored to them. The lie was transparent. Her family had not mourned, they had celebrated her absence. And Thorn would never allow her return, not when she might speak of what she had discovered in these ruins. The journal, the truth about Dominic's curse, the evidence of Thorn's betrayal, all of it threatened the carefully constructed deception that had stood for 20 years. I choose to remain here, Rhiannon said. One of the younger warriors stepped forward, spear raised. You do not have that choice, Omega. You belong to the pack. Dominic's snarl erupted with explosive violence, his lips pulling back to reveal teeth designed for tearing flesh. The warrior stumbled backward, nearly dropping his weapon. Even Owen shifted his weight, reassessing the threat before him. The beast protects her. Owen observed his tone, thoughtful rather than afraid. Interesting. It should have killed her days ago. Perhaps it is not the mindless creature Thorn claimed, Rhiannon said, letting the words hang between them. Owen's face revealed nothing, but the warriors exchanged uneasy glances. They had been raised on stories of the cursed wolf, of the monster that existed only to destroy. Seeing it stand guard over an Omega rather than slaughter her challenged everything they believed. Alpha Thorn will want to hear of this, Owen said. He will be most interested in why the beast spares one of our own. The threat was implicit. Thorn would come himself, would bring more warriors, would not leave until he understood what had changed. And once he learned Rhiannon had found evidence of his crimes, once he realized the curse might be breaking, he would do whatever necessary to eliminate the danger, including killing them both. Rhiannon made a decision that felt inevitable. Tell Thorn the truth. Tell him I know what he did. Tell him I found Seraphina's journal, that I understand how he poisoned his Alpha King and forced a curse upon an innocent man. Tell him his reign was built on betrayal and murder. Silence fell heavy as stone. The warriors stared at her as though she had grown a second head, confusion and disbelief warring across their features. But Owen went very still, the stillness of a predator, deciding whether to strike or retreat. You speak madness, he said finally. There is no Alpha King. Dominic Ashwood abandoned his throne 20 years past. Dominic Ashwood stands before you trapped in wolf form by magic, Thorn compelled through violence. The journal documents everything. The poisoning, the threats, the execution of innocents to force compliance. Your Alpha is a liar and usurper. Owen's hand moved to the sword at his hip. Careful, Omega. Such words could be considered treason. Truth is not treason. I have proof. Written confession from the witch who cast the curse. Thorn cannot hide behind his lies forever. The beta studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, more dangerous. You truly believe this creature is the lost king? I know he is. Then you are as cursed as the beast. Owen turned to the warriors. We return to report what we have found. Alpha Thorn will decide how to proceed. They withdrew into the forest, moving quickly now that subtlety served no purpose. Rhiannon watched them disappear among the trees, her pulse racing. She had just declared war on the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. There would be no forgiveness, no mercy if Thorn caught them before the curse fully broke. The moment the warriors passed beyond sight, Dominic's body convulsed. The transformation took him hard and fast, bones breaking, with sounds that made Rhiannon flinch despite growing accustomed to the violence of it. When finally he emerged in human form, gasping against the pain, she was there to steady him. That was dangerous, he managed once breath returned. Thorn knows now. He will move against us. He was always going to move against us. At least now he knows we understand his crimes. Rhiannon helped Dominic sit, noting with concern how the transformations left him increasingly exhausted. The curse was fighting back, resisting the mate bond's erosion of its power. Seraphina, Dominic said, we need to find her. With her testimony, with proof of the forced curse, the pack might believe us, might turn against Thorn. Can you remember where her coven dwells? Dominic's expression twisted with frustration. Pieces, fragments. The curse took so much. But there were mountains to the north, valleys hidden by permanent mist, places where magic runs deep and old. 3 days of travel, perhaps 4 if they had to remain cautious, but they had no choice. Remaining in the ruins meant waiting for Thorn to return with overwhelming force. At least moving gave them initiative, put them on the path toward breaking the curse completely. We leave at dawn, Rhiannon decided. You know the forest better than any tracker Thorn can send. We use that advantage. Dominic caught her hand, his touch still sending heat through her where the mate bond pulsed between them. If we are caught, Thorn will not grant quick deaths. He cannot afford to let either of us speak. Then we will not be caught. She squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from the connection. We are stronger together. The bond proves on it. He pulled her close, lowering his brow until it nearly brushed hers. I was alone for 20 years, trapped, hunted, becoming less human with each passing season. Then you appeared, offered to a monster as sacrifice, and instead of dying, you gave me hope I had forgotten existed. I will not lose you to Thorn's fear. The transformation claimed him again before she could respond, his body racked with spasms as the curse dragged him back to wolf form. Rhiannon held him through it, murmuring reassurances she prayed were true. They would reach Seraphina. They would break the curse. They would expose Thorn and reclaim what had been stolen. They had to. As darkness settled fully over the ruins, Rhiannon gathered what few possessions they could carry. Seraphina's journal went into a leather satchel she had found in the storage rooms, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth. She packed dried meat left over from Dominic's hunting, approximately 4 pounds, that would sustain them for several days. A water skin capable of holding 2 gallons. Flint and steel for fire. Everything else they would find along the way or do without. Dominic watched her preparations with those unsettling amber eyes, his intelligence evident in every measured movement. When Rhiannon finally lay down to sleep, he curled around her, his massive body providing warmth and protection both. The mate bond hummed between them, growing stronger with each shared moment. Somewhere in the darkness, Thorn was planning. Somewhere beyond the forest, warriors prepared for orders. But here in the ruins of a fallen kingdom, an Omega and her cursed king rested, gathering strength for the battle ahead. Dawn broke cold across the ruins, mist clinging to broken stones and turning everything ghostly. Rhiannon woke to find Dominic, already alert, his wolf form, pacing the perimeter with restless energy that spoke of urgency and danger both. She gathered their supplies quickly, slinging the leather satchel containing Seraphina's journal across her body where it rested against her hip. We travel fast, she told him, running her fingers through his fur one last time before they departed. Thorn will send trackers, but you know this forest better than anyone. Dominic's answering rumble held agreement in something darker. He had lived as hunted prey for 20 years, learning every hidden path, every stream that could mask a scent trail, every hollow where a wolf could hide. Now those survival skills would serve them both. They moved north into terrain that grew progressively wilder. The forest here was ancient trees so massive their trunks required 3 men linking hands to encircle. Undergrowth grew thick between them, making passage difficult for anyone unfamiliar with the hidden game trails. But Dominic navigated with confidence born of intimate knowledge, leading Rhiannon through spaces she would have sworn were impassable. By midday, they reached a river running swift with snowmelt from distant mountains. The water would hide their scent, make tracking them nearly impossible. Dominic plunged in without hesitation, powerful legs propelling him across the current. Rhiannon hesitated only a moment before following, gasping as the cold shocked through her clothes. The river was deeper than it looked, the bottom slick with moss-covered stones that threatened to sweep her feet from under her. The far bank rose steep, requiring both hands to climb. Rhiannon's muscles burned with effort, her fingers finding purchase in exposed roots and jutting rocks. When she finally pulled herself up beside Dominic at the top, her body protested the pace they had been keeping. They had been traveling hard since dawn, and exhaustion was beginning to make itself known. I need to rest, she admitted, hating the weakness, but knowing that pushing beyond her limits would help no one. Dominic led her to a dense thicket where fallen logs created natural shelter. While she caught her breath, he vanished into the trees, returning minutes later with a rabbit caught fresh. The efficiency of his hunting would have disturbed her weeks ago. Now she felt only gratitude as he transformed briefly to human form, his hands making quick work of preparing the meat for cooking. The transformations are lasting longer, Rhiannon observed as she worked to build a small fire. Dominic had been human for nearly 30 minutes now, longer than ever before. The bond is working. Not fast enough. His voice carried frustration that bordered on desperation. Thorn moves while I remain trapped. By the time we reach Seraphina, by the time the curse breaks fully, how many warriors will he have gathered? How many will die because I cannot reclaim my throne? Rhiannon looked at him properly, seeing how he carried the burden of 20 lost years. For 2 decades, Dominic had existed as beast, unable to protect his kingdom or challenge the usurper who had stolen everything. The curse had taken his crown, his people, his very humanity. Now with freedom finally within reach, urgency drove him mercilessly. You cannot break a curse through force of will alone, she said gently. The mate bond requires time to work to unravel magic that was years in the making. We are moving as fast as we can. The transformation seized him before he could respond, his body convulsing back to wolf form with the violence that never seemed to lessen. Rhiannon held him through it, her hands gentle on his shaking frame, until finally the wolf emerged exhausted and panting. They rested through the hottest part of the day, Rhiannon dozing against Dominic's warm side while he kept watch. When shadows began lengthening, they resumed their journey, pushing deeper into wilderness few dared enter. The second night brought them to terrain that felt different. The air itself held weight here, dense with magic so old Rhiannon could taste it on her tongue. Trees grew twisted, their branches forming patterns that seemed deliberately shaped rather than naturally grown. Even the ground beneath her feet felt alive, pulsing with energy that raised the fine hairs along her arms. "We are close," she said, though she had no rational reason to believe it. The certainty lived in her marrow, an instinct as undeniable as the pull of the mate bond itself. Dominic's ears swiveled forward, his nose testing the wind. Then he moved with purpose, leading her up a steep incline where loose stone made every step treacherous. Rhiannon climbed carefully, using roots and exposed rocks for handholds, trusting Dominic's guidance, even when her own senses screamed they were ascending toward nothing. At the summit, the world opened into something impossible. A valley stretched below them, hidden so completely that Rhiannon understood immediately why no one had found Seraphina's coven in 20 years. Permanent mist filled the depression, glowing faintly with its own luminescence. Through the shifting white, she caught glimpses of structures, small cottages arranged in a circle around a central clearing. Protective wards shimmered at the valley's entrance, visible only because the setting sun caught them at the right angle. But something else watched from within the mist. Dominic's hackles rose and Rhiannon felt it too, a presence that had been waiting 20 years for the cursed king to return. The barrier recognized him, yes, but would Seraphina welcome the man she'd been forced to destroy? Had grief and isolation twisted the witch into something dangerous? "How do we pass the wards?" Rhiannon asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dominic's response was to step forward, allowing his body to make contact with the magical barrier. Light blazed where fur met wards, spreading outward in ripples. For a heartbeat, Rhiannon feared they would be repelled or worse. Then the magic recognized something in Dominic, some mark of kingship or residue from Seraphina's original curse, and the barrier opened. They descended into the valley together, mist closing around them until Rhiannon could see barely 3 paces ahead. She kept one hand on Dominic's shoulder, letting him guide her through the disorienting white. Shapes moved in the fog, human forms that watched their approach, but did not interfere. At the valley floor, the mist thinned enough to reveal the coven properly. Perhaps 20 cottages formed the circle, each showing signs of careful maintenance despite the isolation. In the central clearing, a bonfire burned, despite the lack of any visible wood, magical flames casting no heat. And beside that fire stood a woman whose face Rhiannon recognized from careful descriptions in the journal, Seraphina Wilde. 20 years had aged her silver threading through hair that had been fully dark in her youth. Lines marked her face, evidence of worry and grief carried across decades. But her violet eyes remained sharp, assessing missing nothing as Dominic and Rhiannon approached. "Dominic Ashwood," Seraphina said, her voice carrying across the clearing. Then her expression shifted, shock, yet giving way to something harder. "After 20 years you finally come. But do you come as king or as the beast I made you?" Dominic transformed, the change flowing more smoothly than ever before, though pain still marked his features. When he stood human once more, he met Seraphina's gaze steadily, despite the naked vulnerability in being judged by the woman who had cursed him. "You left me a way out of the curse. We found your journal, your instructions. This is Rhiannon. She is my mate." Seraphina's attention shifted to Rhiannon, those unsettling violet eyes seeming to see through skin to the soul beneath. The silence stretched, and for a moment Rhiannon feared the witch would refuse them, would turn them away, or worse, would use her magic to finish what Thorn had started. Then Seraphina's expression crumpled, 20 years of guilt and hope warring across her weathered face. "The mate bond manifests already. I can see the mark beginning on her neck. You found her. After everything, you found her." Tears carved paths down her cheeks, and when she spoke again, her voice shook. "Forgive me, my king. I have carried the weight of what I did to you every day since." "There is nothing to forgive," Dominic said quietly. "You saved my life, Seraphina. The cure you wove into the curse is the only reason I stand before you now as a man rather than a beast." "But the bond is not yet complete," Seraphina said, composing herself with visible effort. "The mark is there, but the claiming has not finished." "Thorn knows we live," Rhiannon said. "He knows we found the journal. He will come with warriors with silver weapons meant to kill. We need the curse broken before then." Seraphina moved closer, studying Dominic with the intensity of someone examining their greatest work and worst sin combined. 20 years I have waited for this moment. 20 years wondering if my resistance, my hidden cure would ever be discovered. Tell me, my king, do you remember what I said when Thorn forced me to cast the curse? Dominic's brow furrowed. Pieces. Fragments. You said it could be undone, that I should not lose hope. I said more than that. I said the mate bond would break what I was forced to create, but only if the bond completed fully. Half measures will not suffice. You must complete the mating ritual, allow the bond to seal entirely before the curse will release its hold. Heat flooded Rhiannon's face, but she kept her voice steady. What does the ritual require? Seraphina's smile held sympathy. What all mate bonds require. Physical union with conscious acceptance from both parties. The claiming and the choice made simultaneously, sealing the bond in a way that overwrites even forced magic. She paused, and her next words carried weight. But the bond must be completed at the correct phase of the moon. Tomorrow night, when the moon rises full. The timing matters, amplifies the bond's power. Attempt it too soon and the curse may resist successfully. One more day to wait while Thorn gathered his forces. Rhiannon wanted to protest the delay, wanted to demand they complete the bond immediately regardless of moon phases. But Seraphina had created the cure, had woven the solution into the curse itself. If she said timing mattered, then they had to trust her knowledge. Will you testify? Rhiannon asked. When we face Thorn, when we expose his crimes, will you speak the truth before the pack? Seraphina's expression hardened with purpose. I will do more than testify. My magic can project memories, allow others to witness what occurred 20 years past. Thorn will face not just accusation, but irrefutable proof of his betrayal. Around them, other coven members had emerged from their cottages, drawn by the commotion. They stared at Dominic with expressions ranging from awe to grief, seeing their king restored after decades believing him lost. An elderly woman stepped forward, a wetness gleaming on aged skin. Your Majesty, she whispered, dropping into a bow that others quickly echoed. Forgive us. We could not protect you. There is nothing to forgive, Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion. You survived. That is what matters. The coven welcomed them with cautious hope, offering food and shelter. Rhiannon ate mechanically, her mind already focused on the coming confrontation. Tomorrow night, the curse would break. Tomorrow night, Dominic would reclaim his humanity fully, and then they would ride to face Thorn, to tear down the lies and restore truth, if they survived that long. The day passed with agonizing slowness, each hour stretching like pulled thread. Rhiannon spent the morning with Seraphina in the witch's cottage, a small structure surprisingly warm despite the perpetual mist that filled the valley. The interior smelled of dried herbs and old magic bundles hanging from ceiling beams, alongside crystals that caught what little light filtered through the windows. The ritual requires perfect precision, Seraphina explained, spreading ancient texts across a scarred wooden table. Her violet eyes tracked Rhiannon's expressions, ensuring comprehension of each crucial detail. One misstep, one incorrectly pronounced syllable, and the curse may resist breaking. Or worse, it could fracture partially, leaving Dominic trapped between forms. Rhiannon's stomach clenched at the possibility. She had witnessed the agony of Dominic's transformations, seen how the curse tore at him with every shift between wolf and man. To imagine him caught permanently in that liminal space, neither one nor the other, was unbearable. Tell me everything, she said. I will not fail him. Seraphina's expression softened with something approaching approval. The bond requires 3 elements working in harmony. First, conscious acceptance from both parties, spoken aloud under the full moon's direct light. The words must be your own from your heart, but they must contain acknowledgement of choice. The mate bond is sacred because it is freely given, never compelled. She paused, ensuring Rhiannon absorbed this foundation before continuing. Second, physical union that seals the connection through flesh and blood. This is not merely coupling, though that is part of it. The marking must occur, Dominic's teeth breaking your skin to leave his claim visible to all. The pain will be sharp but brief, and from it comes the permanent bond that ties your souls together. Rhiannon touched the back of her neck where she could feel the mark already beginning to form warm beneath her fingers. And the third element, she asked, the invocation of binding words in the old language, the tongue spoken before kingdoms rose and fell, before pacts formed their hierarchies. These words carry power because they have been used for this purpose since wolves first learned to love. I will teach them to you now, and you must practice until they flow as naturally as breath. For the next 3 hours, Seraphina drilled the phrases into Rhiannon's memory. The words tasted strange on her tongue, syllables that seemed to resonate with something deeper than mere sound. Each phrase held specific meaning, one for acceptance, one for binding, one for sealing the bond, against any who might try to break it. Rhiannon repeated them until her throat grew hoarse, until Seraphina finally nodded satisfaction. You have the pronunciation correct. Tonight, when the moment comes, let your heart guide the cadence. The words carry their own power, but your intent shapes how that power manifests. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Dominic joined them. He had spent his morning with the Coven's eldest members, warriors, who had served under his reign and remembered what it meant to follow a true king. They recounted stories of his leadership, of the justice he had brought to territories long plagued by corruption and violence. Rhiannon saw how their words affected him, how he carried the burden of 20 lost years. They speak of you with reverence, she told him, when they found a moment alone walking through the mist-shrouded valley. They never stopped believing you would return. They endured 20 years of exile because of my failure to see Thorn's betrayal coming. Dominic's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his beard. 2 of their number died to force Seraphina's compliance. How can they look at me with anything but accusation? Rhiannon stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Because you are not responsible for Thorn's choices. He poisoned you, threatened innocence, built his power on lies and murder. That guilt belongs to him alone. I should have seen it, should have recognized his ambition, his resentment. The signs were there, and I ignored them because he was my friend, my trusted beta. Pain colored Dominic's voice, the old wound still raw despite 2 decades having passed. That blindness cost everything. Rhiannon took his hands, her fingers tracing the rough palms that spoke of 2 decades spent hunting, fighting, enduring. Then do not be blind now. Thorn is coming. Seraphina's magic showed us that truth in the scrying bowl this morning. He brings 30 warriors, maybe more, and he intends to end this before you can reclaim your throne. We break the curse tonight, and then we face him together. Dominic pulled her close, lowering his brow until it nearly brushed hers. I was alone for 20 years. Trapped, hunted, becoming less human with each passing season. Then you appeared, offered to a monster as sacrifice, and instead of dying, you gave me hope I had forgotten existed. I will not lose you to Thorn's fear. You will not lose me, Rhiannon promised. The bond is strong. Can you not feel it? I feel it. His voice dropped to a whisper. It burns in my chest like fire pulling me toward you even when I am wolf. You are my North Star, Rhiannon, the fixed point around which everything else revolves. The afternoon passed in preparation. The Coven created a sacred circle in the clearing, using salt and crushed crystals that gleamed faintly with their own luminescence. They wove protective wards around the valley's perimeter, strengthening the barriers that had kept them hidden for 20 years. Warriors checked weapons and armor, preparing for the confrontation that would follow the ritual. As dusk approached, Rhiannon bathed in a spring-fed pool the Coven maintained, washing away the dirt and exhaustion of travel. Other Coven members assisted her, braiding her hair with threads of silver and decorating her skin with symbols meant to amplify the mate bond's power. They dressed her in a simple white shift, traditional garb for one about to be claimed. You are very brave, one of the younger witches said while fastening the last clasp. Not many would accept a mate bond with such certainty, especially under these circumstances. It does not feel like bravery, Rhiannon admitted. It feels inevitable, like this was always meant to happen. Like every choice I made, every step I took was leading me to this moment. The witch smiled. That is the mate bond speaking. It knows what your mind sometimes doubts. Trust it. The moon rose full and luminous, its light transforming the mist-filled valley into something ethereal and otherworldly. Rhiannon emerged from the cottage to find the entire Coven gathered in a circle around the sacred space they had prepared. Dominic stood at the center wearing ceremonial robes in deep blue that marked him as royalty. His dark hair had been combed back from his face, his beard trimmed neatly. He looked every inch the king he had been, the ruler he would become again. When those eyes like burnished gold found her across the clearing, Rhiannon felt the mate bond flare with such intensity it stole her breath. Want and need and love so profound, it bordered on pain, all tangled together in the connection that pulsed between them. She moved toward him through the parted Coven members, her bare feet silent on earth that had been consecrated for this purpose. Seraphina stood beside the sacred circle, her hands already raised to begin the ritual. Dominic Ashwood, Alpha, king of these lands, and all who dwell within them, do you stand before witnesses to claim your mate? I do. Dominic's voice rang clear across the clearing, carrying weight that came from absolute certainty. Rhiannon Rivers Omega, who was cast out and offered as sacrifice, do you stand before witnesses to accept your mate? I do. Rhiannon's voice emerged steadier than she felt her hands steady despite the enormity of what was about to occur. Then speak your acceptance, Seraphina intoned. Let the words come from your hearts, witnessed by the full moon, and bound by the magic that flows through these sacred grounds. Dominic took Rhiannon's hands in his grip firm and warm. I choose you, Rhiannon. Not because fate demanded it, not because the mate bond drew us together, but because you saw a beast and chose to see the man beneath. You gave me hope when I had forgotten such things existed. You stood beside me when wisdom would have counseled flight. I choose you as my mate, my Luna, my equal in all things from this night until the end of my days. Tears pricked Rhiannon's eyes at the raw honesty in his words. She gripped his hands tighter, letting her own truth spill forth. I choose you, Dominic. When I should have died in that forest, you spared me. When I needed protection, you provided it. When I needed purpose, you showed me I could be more than what others decided for me. I choose you not just as king, but as the man who held me through pain, who shared his broken pieces and trusted me with them. I choose you from this night until the end of my days. Power flooded the clearing the moment their declarations completed, the mate bond blazing to life with such force that several coven members gasped. Golden light erupted from where Dominic and Rhiannon stood, with clasped hands spreading outward in waves that made the protective wards shimmer and strengthen. Then let the claiming commence. Seraphina said, her voice distant now as magic older than memory took control of the ritual. The coven withdrew to give them privacy while remaining close enough to maintain the sacred circle's integrity. Dominic drew Rhiannon close, his hands gentle, despite the urgency thrumming through their bond. She felt his desire, his love, his desperate need to complete what they had started. And beneath it all, she felt the curse beginning to fracture, sensing the completion of the bond approaching. Their union was both sacred and primal bodies moving together in the ancient dance that had sealed mate bonds since wolves first walked the earth. When Dominic's teeth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, marking her as his, in the traditional way, the pain was sharp and bright before transforming into pleasure so intense Rhiannon cried out. The old words spilled from both their lips simultaneously, the syllables Seraphina had taught them, flowing with power that resonated through earth and air. Light erupted from where their bodies connected, golden and brilliant, spreading outward in waves that made the watching coven shield their eyes. Dominic's body convulsed, but this was different from the agonizing transformations the curse had forced upon him for 20 years. This was magic being unmade chains dissolving freedom, returning after an imprisonment that had lasted far too long. The light intensified until Rhiannon had to close her eyes against the brilliance, but she held Dominic through it, their bond anchoring them both as the curse shattered into fragments that dissolved like mist in sunlight. When finally the light faded and Rhiannon could see again, Dominic remained fully human. No tremors preceded unwanted transformation. No pull dragged him back toward wolf form against his will. He looked at his hands with wonder, flexing fingers that would remain human for as long as he willed them, tears streaming down his face as 20 years of captivity finally ended. The moment stretched eternal as Dominic stood before his gathered warriors and the assembled coven, his newly restored humanity radiating power that even the youngest among them could feel. The mate mark on Rhiannon's neck glowed faintly in the moonlight, answering the mark that had manifested on Dominic's shoulder during their ritual. Two halves of one whole bound now beyond any curse's ability to separate. But victory carried a bitter edge. Even as Seraphina began preparations to travel to the Pack's main territory, even as the coven celebrated the curse's breaking, a commotion erupted at the valley's entrance. The protective wards that had hidden the sanctuary for 20 years shimmered and buckled, strained by the force of those who pressed against them from outside. They are here, Seraphina said, her expression grave as she extended her senses through the magical barriers. Thorn brings his warriors, 30 at least, perhaps more. He has silver weapons and chains forged specifically to bind shifters. He comes prepared for war. Dominic's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively moving to where a sword should hang at his hip. He wore only the ceremonial robes from the mating ritual, but already his bearing had transformed. No longer the hunted beast struggling for scraps of humanity, he stood as the Alpha King who had once commanded armies and brought justice to lawless territories. How long until they breach the wards, he asked. Minutes. Perhaps less if Thorn has brought his own witch. Seraphina's violet eyes flashed with anger. He would dare attack this sacred space, risk the coven's wrath, all to maintain his stolen throne. Dominic turned to address the assembled coven warriors, men and women, who had lived in exile for 20 years, awaiting this moment. I will not ask you to fight my battles. You have suffered enough because of Thorn's crimes. But if you choose to stand with me, if you choose to help me reclaim what was stolen, I swear on my mate bond that I will never again allow such injustice to stand unchallenged. The eldest warrior, a grizzled man whose scars spoke of countless battles, stepped forward. We have waited 20 years for this, my king. We will not abandon you now when victory is finally within reach. Others echoed his sentiment, voices rising in a chorus of loyalty that made Rhiannon's chest tight with emotion. These wolves had lost everything when Thorn's coup succeeded, had been forced to flee or face execution for the crime of serving their rightful king. Now they would finally have the chance to set things right. Rhiannon moved to stand beside Dominic, ignoring his immediate protest. I am your Luna now. Where you go, I follow. The mate bond demands nothing less. You have no weapons, no armor. This will be brutal, Rhiannon. Thorn will not hesitate to kill you if given the opportunity. Then do not give him that opportunity. She met his amber gaze steadily. We are stronger together. The bond proves that. Let me stand at your side. Before Dominic could argue further, the ward shattered. Magic exploded outward in a wave of displaced energy that flattened grass and sent several coven members stumbling. Through the breach poured warriors in formation, their armor polished and weapons drawn. At their head strode Thorn Drake, his face a mask of cold fury as he took in the scene before him. His gaze found Dominic, immediately recognition and rage warring in his expression. For a long moment, silence held. Then Thorn laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Impossible. The curse should have held. You should still be beast-trapped and mindless. His attention shifted to Rhiannon, to the mate mark visible on her neck. The Omega broke it. How fitting that my carefully laid plans unravel because I underestimated the weakest among us. Dominic's voice carried across the valley with the authority of one born to lead. Your plans unraveled because they were built on lies and murder. I stand before you restored, Thorn. The curse is broken. Your reign ends tonight. Thorn's expression twisted with contempt. My reign? You speak as though you still have claim to a throne you abandoned 20 years past. The pack has prospered under my leadership. They know no other alpha. What makes you think they will accept a king who returns from exile expecting blind loyalty? Perhaps because that king brings proof of your crimes, Dominic said. Seraphina stepped forward, her hands already weaving patterns in the air. Magic coalesced before her, forming a shimmering screen that hung suspended. Watch, warriors of the pack. Watch and see the truth your alpha has hidden from you for 2 decades. The magical projection sprang to life, pulling memories from Seraphina's mind and rendering them visible to all. The warriors watched transfixed as scenes played out in vivid detail, Thorn pouring liquid silver into Dominic's wine during a feast, the poison that would weaken the king and make him vulnerable to what came next. Warriors dragging a struggling Seraphina from her cottage, while 2 young witches lay dead in spreading pools of blood, their throats cut as demonstration of Thorn's seriousness. Thorn standing over those corpses, his voice cold as winter, as he gave Seraphina her terrible choice: curse the Alpha King, or watch every member of her coven die in the same brutal fashion. And finally, the curse itself. Dominic collapsing as the magic took hold, his body convulsing between forms, while Thorn watched with satisfaction barely concealed behind a mask of feigned sorrow. The scene showed Thorn addressing the pack, weaving his lies about tyranny and necessary action, painting himself as reluctant savior rather than ambitious traitor. When the projection faded, several of the warriors who had accompanied Thorn stood with expressions of horror and betrayal. One dropped his weapon, the clang of steel on stone unnaturally loud in the shocked silence. Lies, Thorn snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. Magical illusions mean nothing. Any witch could fabricate such scenes. Dominic pushed aside the ceremonial robe to reveal his shoulder fully. There, rendered in lines that seemed to glow with their own inner light, was the royal symbol, a triple moon sigil that only those of the original bloodline could bear. It was not something that could be forged or faked, a birthright granted by the moon goddess herself to those destined to lead. Gasps rose from the assembled warriors. Several fell to their knees, immediately recognizing what they witnessed. Others stepped back from Thorn, their loyalty visibly fracturing as truth crashed through carefully maintained deceptions. You bear the mark of the royal line, one of the elder warriors said, his voice shaking. Only Dominic Ashwood and his descendants carry that symbol. You are the true Alpha King. He is also the cursed beast who has terrorized our borders for 20 years, Thorn countered desperately. Even now he could transform, could lose control and slaughter you all. Is that the king you wish to serve? The curse is broken, Seraphina stated with absolute certainty. The mate bond severed what I was forced to create. Dominic Ashwood has full control of his transformations, as he did before you poisoned and cursed him. He is no more threat to his people now than he was during his original reign. More warriors abandoned their positions, moving away from Thorn toward Dominic. The tide was turning, loyalty shifting as the truth became undeniable. But Thorn was not finished. He had ruled for 20 years through manipulation and calculated violence, and he would not surrender power without final resistance. "If I cannot rule, then neither shall you," Thorn said, drawing at his sword. The silver blade gleamed in the moonlight. "I challenge you, Dominic Ashwood. Combat by ancient law witnessed under the full moon. The victor claims the throne and the loyalty of all present. The defeated accepts exile or death. A formal challenge following the oldest laws of their kind." Dominic could not refuse without appearing weak, without ceding legitimacy to Thorn's continued rule. And Thorn knew it, counted on it, believed that 20 years of living as beast against 20 years of ruling from a throne would give him the advantage despite Dominic's restoration. "I accept your challenge," Dominic said. "Under witness of the moon goddess and these assembled wolves, we will settle this as our ancestors did. By strength, by skill, by right of the strongest." The warriors formed a circle, creating an arena in the clearing. Coven members supplied weapon swords for both combatants, balanced and deadly. No armor would be worn. This would be decided through pure combat, the most ancient way of determining rightful leadership. Rhiannon wanted to protest, wanted to demand another solution. But she understood the necessity. The pack needed to see their alpha prove himself, needed to witness strength that would command their respect and loyalty. Words and magical projections had exposed Thorn's crimes, but only combat would cement Dominic's claim to the throne. The opponents faced each other across the makeshift arena, silver blades catching moonlight. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Thorn attacked with the fury of a man who had everything to lose, his blades singing through the air in arcs meant to kill rather than disable. Dominic met each strike with precision, born of both formal training and desperate survival. His movements were economical, devastatingly effective. The battle that followed was brutal and beautiful. Two alphas fighting for dominance while their people watched in absolute silence. Thorn fought with desperation, his strikes powerful but increasingly wild, as Dominic's defense remained impenetrable. 20 years of ruling from the safety of a throne had made Thorn soft where it mattered most. He had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival, to face death with every sunrise. Dominic had not forgotten, could never forget after 2 decades as hunted prey. The final exchange happened almost too quickly for the watching crowd to follow. Thorn lunged with all his remaining strength, his silver blade aimed for Dominic's heart in a killing strike. But Dominic moved with the fluid grace of his wolf, sidestepping the attack and bringing his own sword around in an arc that sent Thorn's weapon flying. Before the usurper could recover, Dominic's blade was at his throat, pressed against the pulse that hammered frantically beneath the skin. "Yield!" Dominic commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Thorn's face twisted with rage and humiliation. For a heartbeat, Rhiannon thought he might refuse, might force Dominic to execute him right there. But survival instinct won over pride. "I yield," he spat, the words clearly bitter on his tongue. Dominic lowered his blade but did not step away, keeping Thorn pinned under the weight of his dominance. By the ancient laws witnessed here, under the full moon, the throne returns to its rightful holder. "Do any challenge this claim?" Silence answered him. The warriors who had accompanied Thorn now knelt in submission, recognizing their true Alpha King. Even those who had served Thorn longest could not deny what they had witnessed. The truth of his betrayal revealed through Seraphina's magic, the royal mark blazing on Dominic's shoulder, and most damning of all, his victory in ritual combat. "Then hear my judgment," Dominic said, his voice carrying to every corner of the valley. "Thorn Drake, you who poisoned your king, who threatened innocence to force a curse, who built your reign on lies and murder, I grant you exile. You will leave these territories before the next moonrise and never return. Should you set foot on Packlands again, the sentence will be death." Gasps rose from the assembled wolves. Exile was considered worse than execution for most shifters, condemning the exiled to life without pack, without the connections that define their existence. But it was also mercy, a demonstration that Dominic would not rule through vengeance even when vengeance was justified. "You let me live." Thorn's expression showed confusion alongside continued fury. "After everything I did, you grant mercy." "I grant justice," Dominic corrected. "Death would be too quick, too clean. You will live with what you have done, stripped of power and position alone, in a way you never forced me to be alone. That is sufficient punishment." 2 warriors came forward to escort Thorn from the valley, ensuring he would not linger to cause further trouble. As they led him away, the fallen Alpha looked back one final time, his expression unreadable. Then he was gone, disappearing into the forest that had been Dominic's prison for so long. The moment Thorn passed beyond sight, the assembled pack erupted in celebration. Warriors who had served Dominic decades ago shouted his name, their faces wet with relief. Coven members embraced one another, relief and joy mingling with grief for the 20 years lost. Even those who had never known Dominic's original reign seemed caught up in the moment, recognizing they had witnessed something momentous. Among the celebrating warriors, Rhiannon noticed an older woman embracing a young man who shared her eyes. Mother and son separated for 20 years by Thorn's purge. The woman's sobs carried across the clearing, not grief now, but relief. "My boy," she kept repeating, her weathered hands cupping his face as though afraid he might vanish. "My boy, you're alive." Justice had cost them 2 decades, but they had survived to see it. Nearby, two warriors clasped forearms in the traditional greeting, their matching scars suggesting they had fought side by side in Dominic's original guard. 20 years, one said hoarsely. 20 years, and we're finally home. Seraphina approached, her expression satisfied. "You have reclaimed your throne, my king. Now comes the harder work, rebuilding what was broken, healing what was damaged." Dominic reached for Rhiannon, drawing her against his side. "I will not do it alone. I have my mate, my Luna. Together we will forge something better than what existed before." The formal proclamation came at dawn. The entire pack gathered in the main territory near Whitefish, Montana, summoned by runners Dominic had sent ahead to announce his return. Hundreds filled the central square, their expressions ranging from hope to skepticism to outright disbelief. Thorn had ruled for 2 full decades. Many of the younger wolves had never known another alpha. Dominic stood before them in borrowed armor that fit imperfectly, his bearing regal, despite the mismatched equipment. Beside him, Rhiannon wore the simple dress from their mating ritual, the mate mark visible on her neck for all to see. Seraphina stood witness, prepared to show her magical projection again, if any doubted the truth. "I am Dominic Ashwood," he began, his voice carrying across the square without need for amplification. 20 years ago, I was your Alpha King. My beta poisoned me, forced a witch to curse me, and spread lies about my reign to justify his coup. For 20 years, I lived as the beast you feared, trapped in wolf form, and losing more of my humanity with each passing season. He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "I do not blame those who believed Thorn's lies. He was convincing, had evidence he carefully fabricated, and none of you had reason to question a beta you trusted. But the truth stands revealed now. The witch who was forced to curse me lives to testify. The mate who broke that curse stands at my side, and I bear the royal mark that cannot be forged or falsified." Dominic pushed aside his armor to reveal the triple moon sigil glowing faintly on his shoulder. Even from a distance, its authenticity was undeniable. Rhiannon heard gasps rise from the crowd, saw wolves falling to their knees in recognition. "I reclaim my throne, not through conquest, but through right of birth and victory in ritual combat. I ask for your loyalty, not because it is owed, but because it is earned. Judge me by my actions from this day forward, not by lies told in my absence." An elderly wolf pushed through the crowd, moving slowly with the aid of a carved walking stick. Rhiannon recognized her as one of the ancients wolves who had lived through multiple alpha reigns and carried the pack's history in their memories. "I remember you," the old woman said, her voice creaking with age, but carrying clearly. "I remember a young king who brought justice to territories plagued by tyrants, who settled disputes fairly, who protected the weak, who asked for counsel rather than demanding blind obedience." She wept openly, unashamed. "Welcome home, my king. We have missed you." Others echoed her sentiment, voices rising in a chorus of welcome. Not all joined in. Some remained silent, reserving judgment, or still loyal to Thorn's memory. But the majority responded with clear acceptance, and that would be sufficient foundation to rebuild upon. The formal ceremonies took hours. Dominic was anointed with sacred oils by the pack's spiritual leaders, swore oaths to uphold justice and protect his people, and accepted the pledges of loyalty from warriors and civilians alike. When finally Rhiannon was called forward to be proclaimed Luna Queen, her hands trembled only slightly as the crown was placed upon her head. It was not the life she had imagined when Thorn chose her as sacrifice. But as she stood beside Dominic, feeling their mate bond pulse with shared joy and determination, Rhiannon understood this was exactly where she was meant to be. In the days that followed, changes rippled through the pack. Dominic moved quickly to establish his authority while demonstrating the fairness his reign would embody. Warriors who had served Thorn but committed no crimes were offered positions based on merit. 67 warriors underwent reevaluation, with 43 retaining their posts, and 24 reassigned based on skill rather than political loyalty. Those who had participated in the original coup faced judgment proportional to their involvement. The pack's resources, which Thorn had controlled tightly, were redistributed to ensure even the lowest-ranking wolves had access to necessities. $840,000 in hoarded funds were returned to pack coffers for community use. Owen Steelthorne's former beta was stripped of his title and assigned to the stables alongside Garrett. The two men worked in silence, both marked by their failures, one who had followed evil orders, one who had abandoned his daughter. Dominic's mercy was calculated. Let them live to remember what their choices had cost. Let them earn redemption through years of honest labor at $18 per hour, if redemption could be earned at all. Each morning they mucked stalls and tended horses, their former ranks meaningless. Now their survival itself a lesson about the cost of cowardice and complicity. Seraphina's coven was granted 350 acres of protected lands. Their sanctuary expanded to welcome other magical practitioners who had fled during Thorne's reign. The ancient bond between rulers and witches was restored, ensuring that magic would serve justice rather than be perverted to serve ambition. But when Dominic offered Seraphina the position of court witch, she declined with gentle finality. "I've had enough of kings and politics," she said, her violet eyes tired but content. "Let me tend my gardens and train the next generation." That is legacy enough. She would visit monthly to check the wards and share tea with Rhiannon, the two women bound by the magic that had saved a king and freed them both. "The young need to learn that power comes with responsibility," she added, her gaze distant. "That curses should never be cast, even under threat. I will teach them better than I was taught." And one afternoon, 3 months after the curse broke, Rhiannon found herself facing a small group of visitors in the throne room's antechamber. Her father Garrett stood there, shoulders hunched with familiar cowardice. Beside him, stepmother Meredith wore an expression that suggested attendance was compulsory rather than voluntary. But it was the third figure who captured Rhiannon's attention, Briar, her half-sister, whose eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "You summoned us, Luna Queen," Garrett said, unable to meet Rhiannon's gaze. "I did." Rhiannon studied them, these people who had once been her family, who had stood silent while she was offered as sacrifice. "You have petitioned for return to the main territory for homes closer to the castle. I am here to grant that request, but with conditions." Meredith's expression soured further. "What conditions?" "Garrett, you will work in the stables under the head groom's supervision. Your wages will be $18 per hour fare, but nothing more. You abandoned your daughter when she needed protection. Earn your place through honest labor or leave." She turned to her stepmother. "Meredith, you will have no position or special consideration. Your cruelty to me as a child is not forgotten. You may live in pack territory, but you will find no favoritism here." Both father and stepmother looked as though they wished to protest but lacked the courage. Finally, they nodded acceptance and withdrew, leaving only Briar. "And me?" the girl asked, her voice small. "What is my punishment?" "You have no punishment." Rhiannon moved closer, seeing the child her sister had been the young woman she was becoming. "You cried when I was taken. You showed compassion when none other did. If you wish it, I offer you a place in my household, an apprenticeship learning statecraft and governance. You are blood, Briar. That still matters to me." Briar's face crumpled, and she threw herself into Rhiannon's arms, sobbing with relief and gratitude. Rhiannon held her sister close, this one piece of her past worth salvaging and nurturing. That evening, Rhiannon found Dominic on the castle's highest balcony, staring out at the territories he now ruled. She moved to stand beside him, their mate bond humming contentedly at the proximity. "Seraphina confirmed it today," she said quietly. "I am pregnant. We will have a child by spring." Dominic turned to her, wonder and joy transforming his features. He pulled her close, one hand moving to rest gently against her still flat stomach. "An heir. A future that continues what we are building here." "Are you happy?" Rhiannon asked, "with how everything has unfolded?" "I spent 20 years as a beast believing I would die trapped and alone. You gave me back not just my throne, but my humanity, my hope, my future." "Yes, Rhiannon, I am happy beyond any words to express it." They stood together as the sun set over their kingdom, the cursed wolf and the sacrificed Omega, who had become Alpha King and Luna Queen. Behind them lay betrayal and suffering, years stolen and lives damaged. But ahead stretched possibility, a chance to build something better than what had existed before. The pack that had cast Rhiannon out now celebrated her as their Luna. The king who had been cursed now ruled with wisdom earned through suffering. And in the growing life Rhiannon carried hope took root for a generation that would never know the darkness their parents had overcome. It was not the ending either had imagined. It was better.